Throughout the course of our group project, we had a wide range of nonverbal communication. During the initial meeting, 6 of the 8 members had already worked together, and those 6 had very comfortable body language between them. But the new group members, we could see that there were some tense gestures made by them. For example, Nicole can be seen shrugging her shoulders and moving back into her seat. But later on, as the group's cohesiveness started to rise, all members could be seen leaning in and having relaxed facial expressions to show trust between one another. We had one particular moment of conflict when we discussed some miscommunication between group members. There was an instant pushback between the group members who didn't want to engage in the peak of conflict. Their backs were to the chairs, facial expression was limited, but their eyes and ears showed that they were paying attention. For the group members who were engaging to solve the conflict, they were leaning in, using a lot of hand gestures to pinpoint exactly what they were upset about and try to express how they were feeling. The proximity between the group members was more spaced than usual during that conflict, but everybody moved back into the table, leaning in once the conflict was resolved. At some point during our meetings, there were some group members who showed little interest in the topic or had low energy to provide more insight, whether it was like they had to stay up late the night before studying or something like that. Maybe they just didn't have as much energy early in the morning. There are often moments of looking into space, heads bobbing up and down just to pass time, or even laying their heads on tables. However, there were many times of continuous engagement between group members. Everybody was leaning in, they had high energy and good facial expressions when talking about ideas, and were showing nonverbal cues of agreement when an idea turned into a plan.
Along with the nonverbal gestures that were present during our group project, there was a lot of verbal aspects that are important to talk about as well. We made a point to use a lot of inclusive language when we talked about the project, saying things like our project, we, us, versus my part. That was the kind of language we tried to use to give a team aspect to what we were doing, so everybody remembered that we were one unified group. Another way that we used verbal communication in our group project was humor. We all laughed a lot during our project, and everybody tried to be funny to keep morale up. So when we were meeting for group projects, we were actually really enjoying ourselves. Everybody seemed to be having a good time. Our group has a lot of loud people in it. Many of us were speaking over one another, but through the use of things like inclusive language and humor, it became more of a social setting versus a rude interruption. One of the main forms of verbal communication that we used was the GroupMe app, which linked us all together in one giant group chat, and emails as well. Those were the main platforms we used for verbal communication outside of face-to-face group meetings.
There were several instances in which we could have had segmentalism in this group. Had we avoided conflict and not aired our grievances, we would have segmented, but instead we discussed our conflicts, we aired out our grievances and resolved them, which allowed us to avoid segmentalism. The diversity in our group rooted primarily through our various outside individual resources, strengths, and circumstances. We each took on tasks that would suit our individuality with the intentions of helping the entirety of the group process and success. The individual resources that we each brought into the group paid to a huge amount of our creativity and success. For example, Hobby did all of the camera work, Jordan Mosich taught yoga, and Robbie lives in Sawtooth, which is how he informed us about that as a location for our event. A big group discussion that took place in our group was when we were making the decision on where our event would take place. 5 out of the 7 group members are 21 and over, however, Mia and Jordan are not. The older group members wanted the event to be held at Payette Brewing Company because they felt as if their age group would be the most likely to be willing to go to an event off campus. However, Mia and Jordan reminded the group that our target audience would most likely be the freshmen that live on campus because the younger crowd is more likely to come to a BSU affiliated event. This diversity helped us to recognize that as a group, the event would be best if it was held on campus considering the older college students are often not as interested in school events as the younger students. The most simplistic replication of diversity was that our personalities are different. Each personality brought strengths and weaknesses to the group. The group had extroverts and introverts, people who were easily stressed, and the capacity in which everyone deals with leadership was different. The diversity amongst our personalities helped the group balance each other out, create consensus, and avoid groupthink.
Group cohesion is the degree to which an individual member of a group feels an attraction to that group. It's the extent to which members are loyal and committed to that group. It's overall the binding force that keeps that group together. Our group experience had good cohesion. Much of the group had already been working together, and the new members, Nicole and Jordan, both fit in well with the already existing members. This allowed the group to be cohesive from the very beginning. Since the group was so cohesive, we were able to work together effectively, easily express concerns we had throughout our time together, and in the end had a very satisfying and positive, successful project.
Because most of our group members were the same that had worked in the previous project, our group norms were mostly pre-established. However, because we added those 2 new members, we still had to learn the different ways that people enact in order for the group project to be as successful as we all wanted it to be. Most of the group norming took place in our very first week of meeting, as we focused on getting on the same page as to what we wanted to accomplish with our stress relief project goal. During this time, our group re-agreed to the explicit norms set in the code of conduct we had for our last group, with the addition of a few other aspects to really establish what our goal was for this project. This helped our new members better understand the preset goal and to also re-establish a somewhat new goal and feel a greater sense of group cohesion. During the process, the group expected everybody to contribute to the current task that day, notify the group if people were running late, and gather resources from outside of class to help complete our final project. These implicit norms were not explicitly stated in our code of conduct, but were discovered as we got to know what resources each member had available to them due to our individual diversity. However, these established norms were not always met. Occasionally, people would show up late, or there would be a lack of communication in the group. While this did lead to temporary conflict, our group overall had established an understanding to openly talk about conflict. Maintaining this crucial norm allowed us to regain our synergy and regain focus on our goals and be successful in this project.
Roles identify the particular way we as individuals are expected to act in a group. These can be divided into 2 general categories. Roles that take into consideration the importance of the group's tasks are referred to as task roles, while roles that are necessary for the social and emotional needs of the group are called social emotional roles. Both types of roles are imperative in order for the group to function effectively. Within our group, we noticed that all of us took on different roles throughout our whole project. Effective group members frequently take on a variety of roles simultaneously. One of the components of group task roles is initiating, which is described as proposing new ideas, goals, and plans of action. In our first couple of group meetings, all of the group members threw out ideas of what we thought would be a fun and effective idea for the project. Once we had all of our ideas written out, Anna really took on the coordinating role by organizing all of our ideas on a whiteboard and encouraging each member to voice their opinion. Once we had gathered all of our thoughts, we saw that each member had taken on the role of the evaluator. We all put our opinions in on each person's idea, trying to come up with the best options possible. Finally, Anna really took on the consensus testing role by making sure that the whole group agreed with the ideas that we had come up with. We saw multiple members taking on different roles when it came to the social, emotional aspect as well. Nicole and Jordan, for example, were very encouraging and supportive. They were quick to support other members' ideas and show appreciation, which gave a more positive feeling to the overall group process. Finally, I attempted to place myself in a tension-relieving role by joking around and trying to separate us when we were getting off topic. Whenever we were conflicting over ideas, I tried to get everybody to focus on the pros and cons so we could get back on topic whenever we could. In our group particularly, most people were unsure of what their roles were even going into the last few days of our project. This is because roles are constantly changing. Roles in groups can be determined, assigned, or emergent. In our group, most of our roles were emergent. The more we worked together, the more each individual's roles became more apparent to the group. For example, I became the tension reliever and Robbie acted as the process observer. Other members such as Anna and Hobby came into the group with an assigned role. Anna was initially voted into the group leader position, while Hobby was our cameraman because he already had the equipment and the photography skills needed for this project.
Rather had you bring it up.
I think it was a shock to all of us.
We were like, oh, because we didn't even really realize. Yeah, we were like, oh.
It's just something to be aware of in the future. Is like, just speak up. Like when you have an issue, just speak up.
This group had its fair share of conflict. The very first conflict that we had was initially setting out our goals and expectations of the outcome of our event and trying to decide as a group of what our aim was actually going to be. The second was in picking our location, in which we deferred to writing up all of our options up on the whiteboard and creating a pro-con list in order to be able to visualize the pluses and minuses of each differing location, and also thinking about the potential downfalls to each one. The last bit of conflict that we had were in personal variations in the ways that we deal with organization, stress, and our different communication styles. Some of us tend to be extremely organized and on top of things and need to have a sense of control over a given situation and make sure that we are constantly on task. And some of us also allowed stress from other classes to seep into the group dynamic, which could at times cause conflict with sort of different varying feelings that came into the group, instead of just sort of recognizing that we need to be a cohesive group that day and just try and get stuff done. And some of us are extremely loud, and so there would be instances in which we would be talking over each other, even though it wasn't our intention to interrupt people or drown them out. It could come off as being rude or something like that, and we would have to talk about it and make sure that those other individuals were feeling included in the group and that they were being listened to. Primarily, our conflict was dealt with by asking questions, clarifying questions to make sure we're not just making assumptions. Also having lots of group discussions until consensus was met, and making sure that all parties felt good about the decisions we were making, as opposed to feeling as though they're just conceding to what the majority wanted. We focused on collaborating and integrating all ideas into final solutions and decisions as well. Throughout this journey, our biggest challenge was getting it on the same page so that we could truly understand how we all wanted to accomplish our goal. To achieve cohesiveness during this assignment, we started off by asking a lot of questions. We asked each other lots of questions in order to truly understand what we were all thinking and to make sure that everybody's opinion and idea was being brought into a final decision. During our task, we continued to ask each other questions to continue staying on the same page. While we were deciding on where to host our event, we listed our options on the whiteboard and listed the pros and cons of each place. We also incorporated voting to avoid verbal disagreements. Overall, our group's cohesiveness was good, and I believe part of it was because we weren't afraid to ask each other lots of questions, even though some of them were the hard ones.
The first day our group met, we decided to vote someone into a primary leadership position. The group unanimously voted for Anna to take on that position. Her primary role was to organize group meetings and control everybody's schedule. With so many group members having conflicting schedules, it was nice to have Anna who could pick through and see when we could all meet and schedule that accordingly. We primarily communicated through group text applications on our cell phones and Google Documents that we would exchange information on, but we covered the main issues during group meetings with one another. Even though Anna was the primary leader of the group, everybody took on leadership roles at some point based on what their main contribution to the project was. For example, Jordan teaches yoga in her spare time, so whenever we were talking about what we were going to do at yoga, she was the leader of that section of the project. So she would control anything that was going to happen in the actual specific yoga portion of this. So even though we had one elected primary leader, everybody did work as a leader in some capacity during this project.
Overall, our event was a success. We provided a group of about 25 people a few hours of relaxation and fun. We learned about the importance of utilizing individual diversity to create a greater outcome, which we learned by actually doing it and using everybody's individual strengths. One easy way to apply this in the future is by asking group members what they feel their strengths are, given the tasks that need to be completed to meet the goal. A systems approach helped us be more aware of the group process and recognize how important each individual was to creating a whole bigger than the sum of its parts.